Welcome to this week's Paddock Pass podcast. We're back after the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, the Monster Energy British Grand Prix, and this week we are tackling your questions or questions submitted to us by our Patreon followers. And we've got a couple of interesting ones. Well, we've always got interesting ones, but these ones are kind of diverse, I'd say, in their subjects. A reminder, guys, that we are backed by Renthal Street, KTM, and Fly Racing. So big thanks to those companies for coming on board with the Paddock Pass podcast. I'm Adam Wheeler, and this morning I am joined by Mr. David Emmett, who's had some very good news.
I was awoken this morning quite early by an Austrian chap speaking German to me. So my brain had to go into like full gear. But at least he's bringing me a motorbike, which is always it's always a happy day.
Okay, so he wasn't complaining about you stealing the covers. It was more just yeah.
I don't know yet. I've got no idea what's going to turn up. So it should be it'll be all shits and giggles. Let's see.
What motorbike are you riding, and where and when?
I am well. This is the thing, because he wanted to deliver a KTM 1290 Super Adventure S on Monday, but I was intending to leave for Austria on Monday, because to ride down there on a bike I'm completely unfamiliar with and do 1,000 kilometers in a day would be a bit too much like hard work. So instead I'm going to cruise down there in a couple of days.
Are you going to have like a testing run first, Dave, or are you just going to pack up and go for it?
No, I am definitely going to ride around and remember what normal telescopic forks feel like, and figure out what all the buttons do, which is a bit of a problem on a modern motorbike.
Is there any chance as well that you might switch your German love affair to Austria?
No.
Right, fair enough. Okay.
Because well, I mean, like I said, I'm really looking forward to riding it. But firstly, I can't afford to change my bikes again. And secondly, I do love my bike; it's great.
And Neil, I understand you're in the Scottish capital, about to embark on a bit of fringe theatre. Is it true that you're currently in rehearsals and wearing skimpy underwear?
It is true, Ed. Yeah, exactly. It's going to be a bit of a Paddock Pads podcast exclusive to any patrons that are living in the Edinburgh area. You can come and see me down at one of the various theatres in the city throughout this weekend.
It is skimpy underwear, but that's hardly a novelty, is it? I mean, that's pretty much every weekend with Neil Morrison.
I mean, it is the summer here, Dave. So you know, shed as many layers as possible is my philosophy.
You're able to remember your lines. How are rehearsals going?
Pretty decent, I would say. It's been nice, like a day in London and just up in Edinburgh, and going through to Glasgow over the weekend to catch up with some friends. So yeah, it's always lovely to be back in bonny Scotland.
Do any of the three of us feel as lucky, well, not lucky, or maybe glad about life as Fabio Di Giannantonio right now? Is it possible?
I mean, yeah, I got back home and I rode my motorbike for 1,000 kilometers all through England, and it was lovely. So I'm feeling very, very happy. But I mean, Fabio Di Giannantonio has got to be pretty pleased. I mean, it's barely news, is it? The fact that he's officially announced back with VR46 on a factory-backed Ducati. There was a Ducati press release as well, which is always a good sign. It means he's contracted directly to the factory. He's going to be on, he's going to be on a GP25 next year and a GP26 in 2026. So, and he absolutely deserves it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that he's feeling lucky. I think everything that has come to his way this year has been through his own self-belief, his hard graft, and his talent, which many people have doubted in the past. Not that any of them are sat around this current podcast table, but I think he's definitely earned this right. And really, when you compare and contrast where he was this time a year ago, even this time 10 months ago, it really is quite a remarkable turnaround in his fortunes. I mean, we were thinking he was off the World Superbike about this time a year ago, and now he is arguably going to be on one of the three best bikes in MotoGP next year, because I think there's only going to be three full factory Ducati GP25s on next year's grid. Ducati have obviously seen enough in Digia and his performances to suggest that he is worthy of one of them. So I'm inclined to agree with that.
Yeah, the other thing is, I mean, like I know it's difficult reading stuff into body language, but Digi just looks taller, more confident, stronger. He just looks like he was always a little bit. He always looked like he didn't feel like he belonged there, like he belonged in MotoGP, like he looked into it and didn't feel like he really belonged there. But now you can see the belief in his eyes. You can see like the belief in his body language. You know, he stands there and he's like, "I am a MotoGP rider, and I'm going to actually knock this thing out of the park." And it's funny seeing that. It really is quite funny seeing the difference in like confidence. And as we keep saying, so much of racing is between the ears, and it really looks like things are. Didja has stuff between the ears really well sorted. So I'm looking forward to it.
I think you can see him. We have seen him grow in confidence throughout this year. I think it was back at Jerez at the post-race test when he set a really fast time. I think he ended the day in the top three. And one of our journalists, less esteemed journalists, I might add, said, "Hey, wow, what a surprise! Did you, up there in the top of the timesheets?" And he said, "You know what? I'm getting really tired. I'm starting to get really tired of journalists being surprised by me being competitive." And I feel that that is maybe something he wouldn't have said towards the end of last year, where he kind of played along with the whole like, "Wow, isn't this great that I'm up at the front," sort of thing. So yeah, it's been fun sort of analysing that and saying that. And I think he's fully deserving of this ride.
There is, one school of thought that maybe he's not that elite level rider that Ducati need. Obviously, there's two less bikes on the grid next year, but I think there has to be potential there. And I think also the other question is who's going to be the other VR46 rider? I mean, you assume it's 99% going to be Franco Morbidelli, but then perhaps you could also slide in Fermin Aldeguer there. So, thoughts on that one?
I mean, as far as we know that, Franco Morbidelli is a VR46 rider. He's on a VR46 contract, and the most obvious thing to do is to put him on the second VR46 bike. Where they put Aldeguer, it would be interesting if Ducati put Aldeguer into Gresini. That saves Gresini a lot of money. Which again is very good. He will presumably, it's going to be a learning year for Aldeguer next year. So it makes sense for him to be sort of in Gresini, in a good atmosphere, a family atmosphere with good support from Ducati, learning the ropes, understanding MotoGP, and let's see what he can do. And then the question is just then really the only seats that we have open are Trackhouse, which we expect Ayagura to get, and Pramac. And Pramac is interesting. We think that Miguel Oliveira is going to get a seat there, but who gets the second one? We think it's also going to be a Moto2 rookie, maybe Sergio Garcia, but we'll see. But yeah, that's the second. To me, the second Pramac seat is the most interesting question.
Neil, there was also, I think it was quite clear in the press release that, this is a Ducati contract. It's not a VR46 contract, which, would help the team with their financial setup. It also maybe would explain a little bit the decision behind Marco Bezzecchi going, because he was a VR46 rider. And if you have that salary off the books, then it's going to help. But, do you think Franco's a lock there, or is there a chance we could see another surprising situation like, this whole talk with Trackhouse and Ayagura and, even Chantra, Sergio Garcia?
No, I don't think so. I think we heard Davide Tardozzi say pretty definitively on the live coverage of the weekend. Not sure if he was talking to either Simon Crafar or Jack Appleyard, but we heard him say that it was going to be Digia there, and 99% confirmed that it would be Franco. I just don't see how it would be anyone else with Franco's links to the VR46 academy. And it was a bit of a disaster, Silverstone, wasn't it, for Franco? But generally speaking, he's shown signs in this kind of mid part of the season that he's capable of decent results on his day. So I don't see a surprise there, Ed.
Just a reminder, guys, if you're watching or listening to this on YouTube, push the like and subscribe button. That means you get notifications when there is a new podcast. Sometimes we have interviews on the show and we like to clip them and post them independently so you don't have to wade through 40 minutes of us talking rubbish and go straight to the decent content. Another reminder also to join us on Patreon, because Paddock Insiders get special material, of course, all of our Grand Prix daily note shows, and you get the chance to send us questions, and that's what we're going to tear into right now. The first one, very topical, I guess, is something that we were talking about ourselves throughout the course of the British Grand Prix. Jared Carlson asks, why the lack of attendance at Silverstone? Dave, you want to tackle this one first?
It's a bit of a mystery. Then again, it isn't a bit of a mystery. It's, I think, first of all, I think Silverstone gets a bad rap, and I also still wonder whether 2018 is having a bit of a knock-on effect. The year that it was cancelled due to the weather, it also gets a bit of a bad rap because of the spectators. I mean, it's a huge place. It's flat. Silverstone put up lots and lots of grandstands. There's lots and lots of grandstands around for people to sit in. People still sort of worry about, well, will I be able to see? Will I be able to walk around the track? All the rest of it. Ticket prices are, they're not exorbitant, but they're not cheap. Also, I think, for me, one of the biggest things, a lot of tracks, kids under 15 or under 16 or whatever will get in free, and that makes it really affordable for families. Now, my understanding is that tickets, this is the trouble. Journalists talking about ticket prices, well, most of the time we don't know because we never buy bloody tickets. But what people tell me is that basically, I think under 16s pay half price. Which I think, you can sort of make a case for it being reasonable for a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old to be paying half price. But I really think it makes it a big difference when kids get in free. And then also parking, because Silverstone doesn't own a lot of lands to park cars on. People are stuck with car parking charges, and it's really difficult. Silverstone is the middle of nowhere. It's really difficult to get there by public transport. It's not like Assen, where you get off the bus or you get off the train, step in a bus, and you're there in sort of 5 minutes. Also free buses, or Sachsenring, where you're in the middle of the town. You are very remote.
For my 2 cents worth, Dave, I don't think you can understate how much Britain is also lacking a leading rider. It's 3 or 4 years now since we've had a Brit on the MotoGP grid. Go all the way back to 2016 for the last time one appeared on the Premier Class podium at the British Grand Prix. It's been a long, drawn-out kind of slump, really. I can maybe equate it to sort of the late 90s, where there were hardly any motorcycles on the 500cc grid, and also there was a sort of dearth of Brits there as well, all competitive machinery. I think that's also got something to do with it. Having experienced firsthand how Superbike had such a surge in the UK, principally because of Sky Sports coverage, which was quite innovative and in-depth at the time, but then also the likes of sort of Carl Fogarty and other riders coming into the series. It really was like a boom time, going to Brands Hatch and suddenly seeing crowds 2 or 3 times bigger than they'd been in the past. That was largely due to the exposure and just the personality of one person who was winning, as sad as it may seem. But I think that's not something that's unique to the UK. Formula One in Spain was a popular sport, but then it took the likes of Fernando Alonso to make it go into another level. So I think that's also a big thing to take into consideration. Jake Dixon's win was fantastic in Moto2, but will it be enough to bring thousands and thousands of people, considering the Moto2 for the first time this year was lumped after the MotoGP race, almost like an afterthought because of the scheduling? I think that's probably one of the big things, as well as the excellent points you've mentioned.
Yeah, the time of the year, I think, is something that they're maybe going to try and address next year, with the date likely to be, or I think it is going to be, at the end of May, the last weekend of May, just before the TT fortnight gets underway. So clearly they're trying to do something a little bit different. I guess we're right bang in the middle of the summer holidays at the moment. And also, I was sort of thinking about this. If you live in like the north of England, I mean, it's probably as expensive to go to Silverstone as it is to fly to somewhere like Portimao or somewhere like Barcelona, somewhere like Jerez, and stay there for the GP. There's not always a guarantee of great weather. We know that Silverstone maybe doesn't offer the best spectating experience because you are quite far away from the track. And because it is so big, you maybe don't get this kind of sense of atmosphere like you do at somewhere like Jerez, for example. I mean, I went out to watch the morning warm-up on Sunday, and to say that it was flat was, would be making something of an understatement. But again, that's just because where we were, there's not particularly high density of grandstands and people watching, whereas in other parts of the track there is. So yeah, I think the time of the year is maybe a factor. The price, as you mentioned, that as well, and the home hero thing. I saw the manager of Silverstone, Stuart Pringle, saying that was a big factor. But you just have to look at, I think 2 years ago, basically we had almost, I think 19 or 20,000 people more on the Sunday 2 years ago, and there wasn't any British rider racing in the Premier Class that day. So yeah, I'm not sure whether that is. I mean, I think that is clearly a factor, but maybe not as big a factor as we might believe.
Yeah, it's a cool track. It's a historic event, and the presence of Monster Energy, I think, helps because they put on a load of cool stuff. I mean, I'm not sure how much they chip into the likes of the concerts. That has prominent acts. I mean, they're not sort of bands you've never heard of. Or music, maybe it's not to your taste, but at least it's recognizable names. I mean, those bands themselves might draw a couple of thousand fans just to watch the concert, never mind the motorcycle racing. So there is an effort made to put on stuff that's around the Grand Prix. It's not like it's just, give us your money and we're going to give you fuck all back. So I do hope maybe the date change will help next year. Let's see if it can boost the numbers a little bit more at Silverstone.
Sorry, just briefly, maybe hiring bands that weren't big in 2003 and have done very little since then. Could also be an idea. Not that I have anything particularly against the Darkness or the Cooks, but I mean, it was 20 years ago when they were sort of hitting it big.
30 years ago.
Goodness, yeah, we can't have Ash in every Grand Prix now. So yeah, let us know if you've got any better suggestions.
Stiff Little Fingers. I want a petition to have the Stiff Little Fingers play next year's British Grand Prix.
That would be class.
Mike Brown asks, is there a country where more people watch motorcycle racing every year than the UK? He says he's seen footage of the CEV, like what is now Junior GP, and the tracks have been deserted, whereas BSB gets big crowds all around. And, Donington World Superbike is obviously very popular, and then you have the whole road racing scene. So he's wondering if it's a MotoGP or a Silverstone issue for the reason why Silverstone's not packed.
I think that's a really interesting question, and it's hard to say. I mean, no, CEV. I think the difference between the UK and Spain is, why aren't there very many fans at CEV races? It's because they're all racing. There's so many different classes and championships and all the rest of it that there's not enough people to actually attend because they're all already on their bikes. So. It is interesting because the crowds at Grand Prix events in Spain are just phenomenal. Even Aragon in the middle of nowhere gets more than most. Silverstone tends to get. So it's quite difficult. I think it also depends that some of the Italian championship rounds is pretty good. Not so much Mugello, but Misano, for example, just because it's convenient and there's a lot of people sitting there. But yeah, BSB has a really unique situation, and it's a fantastic championship. Also, BSB fans are incredibly loyal to the championship. They love the championship, and it's a very specific championship as well. It's not the tracks are very old, very narrow, not really up to modern racing standards, but they are very, very welcoming to fans. So and it's well promoted. It gets a lot of TV coverage. Hats off to Stuart Higgs for running a really, really successful championship.
Neil, the British Grand Prix next year is confirmed to be the final weekend of May, which encroaches into the TT week. Could that possibly impact numbers? I mean, do we think the TT now has a profile where it could be sucking away some of the people that would spend their money going to MotoGP?
Quite possibly. I mean, the TT is quite a big undertaking if you're a fan, quite a big expense as well to get your ferry or your plane over and to pay accommodation for however long you're staying there. So yeah, that might be something of an impact there. And yeah, what Dave was saying, there seems to be quite a big crossover with BSB crowds and road racing crowds as well. Some of obviously the guys that race on the roads appear in the BSB championship at different kind of levels. And I don't know whether MotoGP is just seen as like a different kind of thing from that. I mean, we were having breakfast on Sunday, weren't we, with a couple of lads who were staying in our hotel, and they said they didn't know any of the MotoGP riders, but they were asking us if we had seen the Superstock race because John McGuinness and Davey Todd were riding in it. So yeah, I think there's maybe quite a few bike fans who, you know, that's just kind of their jam. That's more of their gig. And there's no doubt that BSB sort of has a kind of a profile where, yeah, it's maybe a bit more accessible. The riders are a bit more down to earth. They're not a lot of riders that race in BSB have, you know, full-time jobs away from the racing kind of thing, and maybe they're more relatable to your average biker than a rider in MotoGP. But yeah, I'm not sure whether that really explains what we saw crowd-wise at Silverstone at the weekend.
I also wonder, I mean, sort of a few things. It's quite difficult to travel to Silverstone. You know, it's not the sort of place that foreign fans will travel to. If they're going to travel to the UK, they will be travelling there for something like the TT. I even know or Brands Hatch, for example. I know a few people will go to Brands Hatch because it is just a short hop across the ferry, and then you're there, sort of thing. Whereas Silverstone is quite a long way from that. But then again, so is Donington. So I don't know about that, but I did see a suggestion from someone, and I can't remember who, that maybe having the TT. Or having it just before the TT, having the British GP just before the TT may persuade people, like people from Europe who are going to go across to the TT on their bikes to make a quick stop for Silverstone, like pop in at Silverstone, see the GP, then jump on the bike on Monday and get to the Isle of Man for TT practice. So, yeah, it's an interest. It's an interesting experiment.
I mean, just to cap it all off, I think we've all seen reactions on social media that, some people find it extortionate, the prices involved. Other people think it's very fair and good value. I mean, there doesn't seem to be an easy fix because there's such a diverse spread of opinions. So it's, it's a head scratcher. And you'd only hope that the date change next year could produce some sort of change in the results and the numbers come through the gate. Because as we mentioned, it is a cool Grand Prix. Cool this year because we had sorry, Neil, go on.
Sorry, just one last thing, Ed, just to butt in at the end of your point there. I think you did mention that you'd been speaking to someone from Silverstone, and they said that basically all of their efforts leading up to the Formula One British Grand Prix are taken up by F1, and then they can only really start looking into MotoGP once that's done. So by this year's calendar, that pretty much gives them about a month to prepare and to work on MotoGP. Maybe with MotoGP ahead of F1, I think in next year's calendar that could lead to a slightly different approach from the Silverstone marketing promotional team.
Yeah, also because previously the race was at the end of August, and that gave people a little bit longer to prepare as well. That was an extra month, and when it was at the end of August, it was slightly more popular. So that's a really interesting point. The trouble is that Silverstone is an F1 track. They refer to F1 as we when they speak about F1. And just they make a lot of money off of it. There's lots and lots of people turn up for it. So it's not really surprising that they put all of their efforts into that, and MotoGP is a little bit of an afterthought.
So relatable, Dave, isn't it? Referring to F1 as we.
And that's Moto3.
Me and my bestie, me and Maxi. Yeah, me and Wee Max, my BFF.
We're tying up the subject now, but we hope that the listeners who won their Silverstone British Grand Prix tickets had a good time. Just drop us a line, tell us what you thought of the event, particularly if you hadn't been there before. It'd be interesting to know. As we said before, Silverstone is a cool Grand Prix, and one reason it was slightly cooler last weekend was the 75th anniversary celebrations. And of course, the appearance of all the liveries, it certainly sparked quite a bit of debate. I mean, I've even seen some other motorsport and Formula One journalists positing what Formula One will do next year for their own 75th anniversary. Of course, we know Formula One is a bigger sport, has much more resources. So I wonder, how their activations will go. But, MotoGP managed to steal a march on that one. And we had a question, Archangel sent some feedback saying the liveries were a major pain for the casual viewer to work out who is who. And I know that he or she was not the only person there, because, Dave, you were slightly confounded on Sunday.
Yeah, the worst one was, who was it, Brad Binder not being able to get off the line. And going, oh, it's White Bike, oh, it's Trackhouse. No, hang on, it's not Trackhouse because they're not in White. Who is it? Oh, it might be a KTM. Is it a Grassini? Is it I thought, oh, is it Alex Marquez? Like, I was trying to figure out, and it took us like about 3 minutes to figure out who...
or a Gas.
Yeah, or a gas. Yeah, exactly. That's right. And it is actually a really, really good point. Normally, when there's a special livery, it's just one, it's one tape, or a Misano, maybe it'll be two tapes. And so it's really easy to keep the rest of them sort of apart. But because everyone all of a sudden is in a different livery, it becomes really difficult to actually tell who is who and all the rest of it. And it becomes confusing enough for for sort of like hardcore fans and for professionals. I mean, I felt really sorry for the commentators. I mean, they did a class job, just being able to sort of, follow who is who. God knows what it was like for them, but yeah, for fans, it was really difficult. And for casual fans, it must be really difficult. And especially, can you imagine that's the first GP you see, and then like next race they tune in deciding, oh, that was great, I'll watch that. And then all of a sudden, everyone's in completely different sort of, leathers and liveries and all the rest of it. What the hell is going on?
I thought it was brilliant. And, brief confusion aside, I think they should do at least one Grand Prix every year. Give enough planning, give enough warning, make it happen. And, Neil, how are you? Are you still in cynicism mode over the music bans, or did you think it was pretty good?
No, I thought it was great. I liked it a lot. But just you were saying make it more of a thing. I was told by someone that works with Ducati, €30,000 to have one of those carbon fiber fairings sprayed up and sort of liveried up. So a few teams, I think, were getting a bit of gyp for not running them in warm-up on Sunday. I think the factory Ducati team being one of them. And someone pointed out to me, hey, we had a one-off livery at Mugello. We're going to have a one-off livery at Misano, most likely. These are 30,000 a pop. So, that's 60,000 for both of our riders for the race. I mean, why spend 120,000 when we can just get away with spending 60? So, those are pretty high numbers. Even that would even make a MotoGP team sort of take notice.
Yeah, but it's not enough to have two. You've got to have at least one spare as well in case they crash. They crash in warm up and then they crash, or they crash in Friday practice in the morning and then they do it again in the afternoon. It's just burning money.
Yeah, the factory Ducati Lenovo team was the lamest one. I mean, it barely changed. I mean, surely they must have loads out the back. Just swap another red one in. No one's going to notice. Thank God Inea Bastianini saved the day with the Mike Hellwood helmet replica.
Yes, entirely fair.
Okay, well, it was a good idea anyway. I mean, it looked great. It created enough fuss and discussion. So, props to everybody involved then for turning it around, regardless of the cost. 30,000 seems a lot. I mean, give me 15,000, I'll sort it out, no problem.
Rattle can.
Dave, on a slightly more serious subject, this one's for you. Adam Cole asks us basically what is happening at KTM. I mean, Brad Binder had clutch trouble the weekend. Pedro Acosta is going into detail about like an emergency trip to KTM or to Austria itself, just to sort of ask what's going on. And he kind of fudged around on, a question about this at the weekend at Silverstone by saying he wanted to speak with certain technicians and he wanted to make sure that, I'm trying to paraphrase here, but he said people involved don't just know about computer simulations, they actually know about the physics and they have the experience of racing. and it was kind of guardedly pointed in some sort of way. I think Acosta, as a MotoGP rookie, but still one who signed a new contract to be a Rebel KTM rider for the next 2 years, is already trying to sort of sink his claws into the mechanical processes of the company to make things better. But what's your take? I mean, KTM just haven't really got their heads around how to handle the Michelin this year.
No, to an extent, but also, I mean, especially the last few races, we've been to flowing tracks, and the KTM doesn't really suit flowing tracks. The other thing that Acosta was saying, like, the DNA of the bike is stop and go. That's the way it was born. And I was talking to one or two other people about this as well. And, they're saying, look, these are not our tracks. Our tracks are, the Misanos and the Austrias, the Le Mans, a place where you can actually, or even Jerez, a place where you can actually get the thing stopped, turn it in a V, and then come back out again. And Silverstone is all flowing. So the track just does not suit the KTMs just do not suit the track. KTM are having problems, issues with vibration, with this rear vibration, which is caused by the additional grip of the rear Michelin. But then that's something that everyone has to deal with. And as someone pointed out to me over the weekend, it's when you're winning, if everyone has rear vibration, when you're winning, you don't notice it, and when you're losing, you've got to fight. You're desperately casting around for a reason why you're not winning, and this is one of the things to point to. So let's see. But I mean, it feels like KTM they've had a run of circumstances against them, because it also feels like they've got rid of a little bit of the vibration. They're getting it more and more under control, and it's going to be interesting to see how they go at. I think Aragon is going to be tricky, but I think we will see them do well in Austria, and I think Austria and Misano are going to be two tracks where we can really see where they just where they are.
Neil, I've got a three-parter here for you. Peter Kramer wonders why Jack Miller doesn't have a ride, why Joe Roberts' dream has gone up in smoke, and if Luca Marini is miserable being last every week.
Well, to start, I think Jack Miller finds himself in the current predicament because he's 16th in the championship. And aside from Portugal, where he scored 2 fifth places, it's been a tough season, and you could almost extend this bad run to the second half of last year. Jack was sensational when he first switched to KTM at the start of last year, but lost his way midway through 2023 and really hasn't been able to pick it up since then. And we had the rather despondent side of Jack on Thursday telling us that his phone hadn't really been ringing over the summer break. So he's in. It's really difficult to see him having any chance of staying in MotoGP unless Pramac, Yamaha decide to kind of change their thinking and decide to maybe put him alongside Miguel Oliveira next year rather than looking to Moto2. If Álvaro Bautista confirms with Ducati and World Superbike, then he's short of really competitive options over in that series as well. So yeah, it's not looking easy. It's not a great time for Jack at the moment. At least he did make it to the finish on Sunday after a pretty ropey run of results. Then after that, Joe Roberts, I think you could see that maybe the recent events, the fact that Trackhouse passed over Joe Roberts was having a bit of an effect on him at Silverstone. I heard that maybe just wasn't showing that kind of really relaxed manner that had been helping him to such great results in the first half of the season in Silverstone. Obviously that crash. I mean, he did show that he had potential to be on the podium, maybe even fight for victory with Canet and Dixon, but he had that crash, which was really unfortunate. And then finally, is Luca Marini miserable at being last each week? He's a good deal less miserable now, I would say, because at least now he is on a par with the other Hondas. The first part, the first third of the year, he was like 10, 15, 20 seconds behind Joan Mir, his teammate. And Joan Mir was already 10, 15, 20, 25 seconds behind the victor. So it was a really dire situation to be in. But I think Marini now feels that he is understanding the Honda a little more, has a setting more attuned to his riding style, and at least he is now. On a par with the other Hondas, fighting to be top Honda on occasion. So yeah, no, he's a good deal less miserable now. In fact, he's actually relatively upbeat now compared to where he was at the start of the year.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. He's not the last anymore. He is pretty much on a par with the other Hondas, and he's regularly beating his teammate. It's just he feels like he's got better. Also, it seems like the Honda riders are starting to get a grip on where they are, where the project is, and all the rest of it. So yeah, I mean, Marini is looking at. I mean, he's just a little bit more cheerful as well. It feels like sometimes in debriefs, but before you could sort of like tell that he was trying to put a brave face on things, and it felt a lot less like that at Silverstone.
He's also 2 months away from becoming a father for the first time, so get your sleep in, Luca. Don't be fretting at night. I also just think from a promotional point of view, it would be nigh on essential to have either Jack Miller or Joe Roberts on the Premier Class grid. We'll have only one native English speaker next year, otherwise in Brad Binder. So I think those guys have promotional worth, and that's also. Results aside, I mean, they're clearly capable motorcycle racers. Get them a ride, get them in the championship. Very quickly, Sean asks, where the fuck is Maverick hiding? We kind of covered this on the show on Sunday, but I think we're now starting to see a little bit why he's elected to jump out of the factory Aprilia team for next year, because the bike, the RSGP, does seem to be a little bit finicky in terms of inconsistency in terms of the package, because since Austin, I know Maverick's been trying to find the same motorcycle that he rode that day in Texas, and it's only come in fleeting spells. And undoubtedly he's contributing to that, but maybe it is a little bit more delicate than we realize. I mean, he was talking on Friday about problems with traction control, being unable to accelerate. So maybe it's just a slightly harder bike to get right than we all think. But there we go, Sean. I hope that sort of gives some sort of reply. Joseph Muller says that the BT Sport team, I think he means TNT Sport, were mentioning that Simon Crafar will be focusing on riders or preventing them from cruising next year looking for a tow, because this was another big talking point from the British Grand Prix. It looked ridiculous at times in the Premier Class. What do we think are his odds of success with that? And has anyone actually had a chance to speak with Simon, maybe just to get his views? Because I think he's quite strong on the issue anyway. It just remains to be seen what he could potentially do about it.
Yeah, I think Simon, that is one of his big ideas, one of his motivations going into the role is to tackle this issue head on. I think he is repulsed is a bit strong, but he certainly does not enjoy situations in qualifying where riders are basically sitting around looking for a tow, even if the rider ahead is looking over his shoulder and saying, go on, get on with it. And I think from speaking to him over the weekend, he seems pretty prepared to go in and throw some pretty tough penalties the way of anyone that gets up to those kind of antics next year. I mean, we saw in qualifying, Pecco Bagnaia was pretty strong in his comments towards certain riders, which may or may not have been wearing the number 93 at the front of their bike. That it's just not really on, and no wonder there are similar kind of issues in Moto3 whenever the MotoGP guys are kind of supposed to set an example, but are getting up to these kind of antics. And I think Crafar really wants to go in there and try and throw some tough penalties at the riders that do this. He said it's one of his intentions to go in at the start of the year and say, this is not on, do it, and you get a tough penalty. And I think Simon's the kind of guy that would be willing to stick his head above the parapet and maybe take a bit of flack from certain riders, maybe from fans as well, who think it's a bit too harsh, and throw penalties their way. So, I mean, I would like to maybe get some popcorn and watch the first couple of races next year to see just how that whole thing transpires. But yeah, it certainly seems to be something that he is very keen on stamping on.
Yeah, he could be running a little bit into some talk with Marc Marquez, but mind you, Marc's always pleaded his case, saying, "I'm following riders because I have to." If he's on a factory, GP25 next year, then it could be a different scenario. Maybe people will be following him. But
the other thing is the problem is not following riders. The problem is waiting to follow riders, and so Yeah, I mean, but people are always going to be looking for a toe. The question is, what you want to do is when they look for it, basically what you want to do is move the hanging around for a toe from out on track to into pit lane, where it's a much safer environment.
David Windhorse says, are there any suggestions for somebody to fill Simon Crafar's on-air role next year? It has to be maybe an ex-rider, right, guys? I mean, Simon, by his own admission, took a year to sort of get familiar with the demands of being, someone who could explain the rigors and the demands of MotoGP to novices and also to experts. But, what do we think is likely to happen? Will there be some ex-racer that fills that void, or, any opinions on this one?
Dave, fancy going to India next year?
No, I'm too old for that nonsense. And also, I mean, there is no way I could do the job that Simon is doing. Simon's just done an absolutely fantastic job. I suspect that they will move Jack Appleyard into doing it more full time, because he's already doing a lot of that sort of stuff, and he's doing a really good job. So yeah, I mean, what he doesn't have is the same level of understanding and technical detail that Simon has. That's going to be a big. That's obviously going to be a big hole. It's going to be very interesting to see how they fill that. But I mean, good luck to them.
VJ says, or asks rather, is Fabio fooling himself at Yamaha? He obviously has a big paycheck, but the Japanese don't seem to be making many signs of progress. Dave, you kind of touched on this a little bit with Honda earlier, but there are still signs that things behind the scenes are chiming along, right?
Yamaha are doing an outstanding job. It's just that you can't see any of it yet. The fact is they've had 3 engines there so far this year. We thought they'd only had 2 new engines to test at Valencia, but actually they had 3, because fortunately Fabio Quartararo is an absolutely terrible liar. And when you ask him straight questions, he finds it difficult to remember what he's told us previously. And so he just ends up telling the truth for simplicity's sake. They're doing a lot of work in Europe. They've got a lot of European engineers involved. They're doing the stuff in YMR in Italy. They're a long way back. They need to make progress. It's going to take a while, but I think this time next year they're going to be a lot further forward. I think they're doing a really, really good job. But like I say, they're so far back that it takes a long time.
Yeah, there were some comments that I heard at Silverstone about a recent Yamaha test, which I think, due to weather and different things, meant that there was kind of limited on-track running. But for that test, there were a crazy number of Japanese engineers. There were a crazy number of European engineers there, and people at the test were commenting that really it looked as though Yamaha were properly taking it seriously now. Were properly investing the resources to get back on a par with the top names in the class, and had kind of really properly awoken from their slumber. So yeah, as Dave says, there's not too much evidence on the track at the moment. I mean, Fabio Quartararo's weekend at Silverstone was pretty horrible. 11th place in the race. He was a long way off. Over a second slower than Enea Bastianini per lap. Which is a big old difference to try and make up. But you kind of feel that they're putting the pieces in place behind the scenes to ensure that they can get back on a par. And we know that they've recruited some really, really impressive and intelligent engineers, and now it looks like they're trying to balance things in the correct way with with the European operation and the Japanese one. It's I'm inclined to agree with Dave.
Neil, did you swoon when you heard about the last rumoured rider to be testing for Yamaha?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Cal Crutchlow is injured at the moment. Remy Gardner took over his wildcard appearance at Silverstone. It did sound as though Andrea Dovizioso was doing a bit of testing for Yamaha recently at Misano, which you'd have to say is a pretty smart appointment, because Andrea's level of feedback and knowledge of MotoGP machinery is second to none. He also has good experience of recent kind of Yamaha bike, which was 2 years ago when he ducked out of the season early because of his lack of competitiveness. So I think that's a good kind of omen. And you would have to say from other things that we heard at Silverstone, it is in a bit of a contrast to Honda, who seem to be I wouldn't say in disarray, but still some things you're hearing that are going on there which are maybe not that promising for their hopes of getting back up towards the front. I mean, a big deal was made of the fact that they were in a kind of partnership with Alex Baumgartel at the start of the season from Kalex, who obviously has, kind of masterminded Kalex's dominance in MotoGP over the last decade, not so much this year. And it was confirmed at the weekend to me, I think to Dave as well, that Alex is no longer working with Honda. Some different reasons and different explanations as to why that relationship is the way, or ended the way it did. But I'd heard that Alex grew frustrated with the fact that no one was taking his advice or his feedback or his comments on board. And he felt that this was it was kind of useless being there. Alex obviously feels that he has enough on his plate trying to get Kalex back to the kind of the dominant force in Moto2. And he decided to leave, to cut ties with them. So in that respect, it maybe sounds as though, Honda are doing things to try and make it appear that they're going in the right direction, but not actually adopting the mindset to take those kind of changes on board.
Yeah, there's too many sort of people running around and not really sure what they're doing. Obviously, Alex from Kalex has something important to do in that the Boscoscuro are sort of currently cleaning up in Moto2. So there's a lot of reason for him to be focusing more on Moto2 now. But it feels like Yamaha have a really well sorted plan and are working through very methodically and consistently. And Honda are just casting around desperately for anything and everything to try to fix things. But they haven't really diagnosed what the problem is, whereas it really feels for Yamaha that they understand where they are and they understand where they need to be and they understand what they need to get there. And it's just a question of a small matter of engineering, as we say, just actually going through the steps to get there. Whereas Honda don't know, they're not really sure what their problem is and how to fix it. They're still, they know that they're a bit confused about their engine. They're working with two different engines, but also the chassis itself is still not doing what it should do. The lack of mechanical grip they have on the rear tire is a massive problem for them, and they don't really seem to have a real idea of how to fix it.
Saxon G says, my memory isn't great, but we ever see a proper Ducati rider battle on track for victory that doesn't involve Marc Marquez? Yes, of course. I mean, it's been seven. Yeah, well, it's been seven, lockout podiums for Ducati riders now, and there's a guy called Jorge Martin that's currently, jostling pretty good for consistent results with the likes of Pecco Bagnaia. It's disappointing we're not seeing Marco Bezzecchi up there more as we were in 2023, but yes, Saxon G, be patient. I'm sure there's going to be some proper Ducati scraps that are not going to involve Marquez coming up. Per Rari, who sent us a comment to say that he or she enjoyed Silverstone, but apparently had a tough time getting there. Basically submitted a couple of questions saying, does Bastianini have a good chance to win the championship? And for Moto2, what's going on with Dusan Guevara? Why in general is it so hard to make the leap from Moto3 to Moto2? And that leads into another question from Rasmus as well, who says, how come Sergio Garcia hasn't been linked to too much in MotoGP? Is it because there's too many Spaniards? Anyone fancy a pick at those? I think Bastianini is in championship form, so you'd be silly to rule him out.
I'm going to rule him out.
Okay.
Bastianini's having a really, really strong season. He's definitely going to win more races. He's going to be involved in the championship, but Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia are operating at such an incredibly high level, so incredibly consistent, that they are really, really hard to beat. And I don't think Bastianini has that consistency. I think he's very strong, but I think his bad days are much worse than the bad days of Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia. I mean, Martin had you came away from the weekend thinking that Martin felt he'd had a bit of a tough weekend and he had 2 seconds. That's the kind of level of consistency that you need.
Yeah, I agree to an extent with you, Dave, but I also point you to Enea's last 2 weekends prior to Silverstone. And he came away from Assen, tough track for him, with the third place, and Sachsenring, a terrible track for him, with the fourth place. So I think he recently is showing that his bad days, he's basically minimizing the sort of damage on his bad days. Let's wait another couple of races, because I think we said in the Sunday show, a couple of great tracks coming up for Enea. He should be strong at the Red Bull Ring. He should be really strong at the Misano doubleheader. He won at Aragon 2022 in a direct fight with Pecco Bagnaia. So I would say in 3 or 4 races, we're going to have a pretty definitive picture whether Enea can really go the distance in the championship.
The key also is Saturdays. Keep an eye on the Saturdays. If things are not going too well on the Friday, unlike Pecco Bagnaia, he seems to have a little bit more trouble in getting things sorted out. So, keep an eye on what he's doing on the grid, and then you'll know his chances for the Grand Prix.
Yeah. And just to pick up some of the other questions you asked there, Ad, Ethan Guevara, what's going on with him? He needs to put his phone down in the garage and stop taking selfies. He is not, I think in Moto3, he was so talented that he could just jump on the bike and not really pay any attention to what the bike was doing, what the setup was like, and could still be ridiculously fast. I mean, there's that famous story that he crashed the warm-up in Motegi in his championship year in Moto3, bent the chassis. The chassis was still bent going into the race, and he cleared off and won it by a comfortable distance. Because, it didn't make no difference what the bike was doing underneath him. He could just get on and ride it. Whereas Moto2, I think, is a lot more technical. You need to know, you need to be able to give more detailed feedback. I've heard a few comments that basically there's a bit too much Instagram and not enough sort of data analysis going on in the Aspar box with Ethan. So that definitely needs to change if he wants to make it and step up into Moto2 next year. It sounds as though Luca Boscoscuro is interested in bringing him across to the speed up team next year to replace Fermin Aldeguer, and Boscoscuro is pretty tough on those kind of antics. So he certainly won't be able to, I think, bring his phone into the box there next year. And what else do we have?
Well, same, Dave. You have to quit the Instagram as well. More focus, please. We need another 1,000 words on the race roundups. Just put down those obsession with selfies. The question was about Aldeguer, just maybe on his chances. I mean, it's a question perhaps for previewing 2025. But what about Sergio Garcia, Neil? I mean, what's your view there? I mean, it's ironic, really, that Izan Guevara was, kind of superior and beat Sergio Garcia, but then the roles have been reversed in Moto2, and the second Spaniard has proved to be a bit more, dare I say, intelligent, or able to figure out that technical
intelligent. That's the difference.
Maybe, but also Izan Guevara's a case, I think, for too young. Give him a couple of years to develop. It's an outstanding Grand Prix introduction. I mean, Pedro Acosta is a freak in comparison.
Yeah, but if you're having to teach a rider to stop taking photos in the box when he should be working with his technician, it's clearly not just that. But that, I think, is if you're coming into the box and you don't even realize that it's a place of work, I think that's pretty problematic.
Yeah, because the trouble is that a lot of riders cruise on the talent. You can win Moto3 on talent. You can be extremely successful just on talent alone without needing to do anything else. And this is a problem we've seen with riders over and over and over again. The other thing is they spend a lot of time on these bikes. Basically, you're sort of 12, 13, and you jump on one of these 254 strokes, something similar. They spend 6, 7, 8, 9 years on a bike like that, and then they jump for the first time on a bike which is completely different. So being intelligent also involves thinking about, okay, right, well, I'm going to Moto2 next year. I need a plan to start thinking about adapting to it. But a lot of these riders just, they were incredibly talented in Moto3. They won everything. They could win anything. They could win anything without any, without putting any effort into it. And then they come into Moto2 and they find it's really difficult. And that's where things start to go wrong for them.
I think with the exception of Acosta in recent years, it's become really difficult for riders to make the jump from Moto3 to the Moto2 in the Triumph era since 2019. I've heard a few Moto2 personnel and team bosses this year complain that jump is now too big. We've seen, I think, pretty much every Moto2 rookie this year have arm pump surgery within the first couple of race weekends. And from what I gather, there are discussions in place with regards to the Moto3 technical regulations for the next rule change, which will be in 2027, the same year that MotoGP is going to have its big shake-up. And from what I've heard, an increase in capacity in Moto3 sounds as though it's likely, because I think KTM and Honda and the kind of the rule makers, the people involved in putting these rules together, are aware that the kind of technical gap between the sort of 250cc four strokes that are in Moto3 at the moment and the 765 Triumph triple engines, that's just a bit too much of a gap. There's a bit too much work for rookies to do now on Moto2, so it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. But yeah, it does sound as though they're trying to bridge that gap somewhat with Moto3 and Moto2.
Last but not least, DJ Purchase sent over an interesting one, guys. He says, what will MotoGP look like in 25 years? Aside from perhaps racing every single weekend, 52 Grand Prix could be interesting, I think, for the championship. Any particular thoughts on this one?
I think it's really difficult to predict, because we are about to go through one of the biggest revolutions in terms of transport that we've seen in years, in that we're transitioning away from combustion engines towards something else, and we don't know what that something else is going to be, whether it is going to be electric vehicles, or whether it's going to be a combustion engine with some alternative fuel source. I mean, creating alternative fuels uses up an awful lot of energy to get something back, and internal combustion engines are just not very efficient. 30% efficiency or something, you're losing an awful lot of energy to heat. So I also think we'll have a much clearer idea of what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years' time. We'll have a much clearer idea of what's going to happen in 25 years' time, in 5 or 10 years' time, even in 5 years' time, because I think the next lot of rules will be much closer to this sort of like this energy transition, this transition from combustion engines to maybe something else. And I think then we'll have a clearer idea of what it's going to be.
Neil, how do you feel about transitioning out of Moto E into MotoGP?
Yeah, it could be an interesting thing. Maybe, what is the kind of shorter version of a sprint? Could we have like a mini sprint on a Friday, maybe? Maybe a mini sprint on a Thursday. We could have 4 races over a weekend. Yeah, 2 laps on Thursday, 5 on Friday, 10 on Saturday, then, full race on Sunday.
Yeah, but the other thing is, I mean, like, if you look at the way that batteries have progressed as well, they make an enormous amount of progress, and we're not really sort of like seeing this, which is also why it's really difficult to see. We keep on bumping into what we think are physical limits, but the physical limits keep changing as new technologies, and there's a lot of money being poured into energy storage of all sorts of different types. And we're, a clear winner hasn't emerged, so we really don't know. Like maybe in 25 years' time, we've got electric bikes which weigh 150 kilos, but are also capable of running for a full race distance. So who knows?
Just a reminder that 25 years ago was 1999, and 500cc Grand Prix racing doesn't look a million miles away from where we currently are. I mean, of course, there's progress, and there's differences, variations, but it's not like we're suddenly in a, Back to the Future kind of futuristic void.
Yeah, but in 1999, you had Mick Doohan stinking up 500s. You had 200 horsepower, 500cc for 2 strokes. You had very limited electronics. You had no aerodynamics to speak of. The ride height devices were unheard of. People were still wearing boots which were pretty much just sort of, leather. They were just sort of, a leather covering for the foot. There were no airbags. Things have changed so much in 25 years that it makes it very, very difficult. You can't just sort of like take a line from today and draw it on forward into the future.
A big thanks once again to Renthal Streetfly Racing and KTM for back in the Paddock Pass podcast. We hope you enjoyed this little listeners' questions episode or podcast, publication, whatever, production. This week, we'll be back to preview Red Bull Ring next week if we can catch you on the KTM somewhere, Dave, in Central Europe. hopefully we'll be able to pull over and find a decent enough Wi-Fi signal to chat to us, and we'll see if we can also get somebody else on the pod to, in the style of sort of Neil Hodgson, give us a little bit of a rundown on Red Bull Ring and another historic and very kind of charismatic track, if I can use that descriptive word. Any final thoughts, guys? Deafening silence.
Yeah, it's just started raining.
Okay, guys, thank you very much for listening to the Paddock Podcast. We'll be back again next week.